You refer to love as supreme love. Why?
Love is supreme because it has no conditions. And this is why here in Nityananda Shaktipat Yoga, we refer to love as supreme love. For love to be supreme, there can be no conditions attached to it. Now, to understand this, the steps that have to be taken are to first examine what your understandings of love are, because there's so many different understandings about what love is. Many of them are very contracted because most people are used to bartering and selling, even in their most intimate relationships, also in their friendships and their relationships with family members, that people are bartering and selling in an exchange of limiting desire and craving. And if all parties to the relating feel that the bartering and selling is equal, people call that love. But that's not love. That's infatuation. That's infatuation that's driven by the limitation of the ego. Egoism is what causes us to want to manipulate and control outcomes. And most people who say that they're experiencing love are actually infatuated with this process of bartering and selling in their attempt to manipulate and control outcomes. And so, again, for love to be supreme, it has no attachments, no aversions, and it is unconditional. This unconditionality expands out of the effort to see God in everything and everyone, everywhere. So supreme love begins with love for God. And this is not love for a God that's some far off entity in the heavens somewhere or in a distant land. This is the understanding that God exists equally in each and every one of us, in everything, everywhere. So when a person begins with this understanding and begins to embrace this understanding, it becomes easier to gradually begin to express love without conditions, even when boundaries are necessary. I say even when boundaries are necessary because often in uh, relationships, friendships, intimate relationships, any kind of love relationship or an exchange of love, often there are issues with respect. And so often people find that they have to have boundaries in order to command respect. I'll give you an example. When I first took an intensive, a Shaktipat blessing retreat with my Sri Gurudev many, many years ago, I had an incredible, exalted experience that lasted even after I left the retreat. And during the retreat, I had placed some tilak on my forehead at the third eye. And when I returned home, I didn't want to take it off. So my friends who observed this thought I was crazy. They began to ask me, why are you wearing that? Where have you been? And when I described where I had been and what I had experienced, they started to make fun of me. And then this was the case also with family members, particularly with my father. And so with my father, he took a very bold move. He thought I needed an intervention, and he put together a family intervention with two psychotherapists and all the family members. I was invited to dinner with the family, and when I arrived, they hit me with this intervention. Psychotherapists were there. They began to ask me questions. My father stated all of his concerns, and he said, "You've been brainwashed and you're in a cult." And he talked about being frightened that I was going to be carted away on a bus to some farm somewhere. This was all a big game in his own mind. And he never asked me what I experienced. He never asked me what the ashram was like. He never asked me anything about my guru. So I looked at my family members and the psychotherapist and I said, have any of you been to my guru's ashram? Have you experienced any of the programs? Have you met him? Have you had a chance to interact with him? Of course, they all said no. Why would we do that? And then I said, you all need to shut up. This is unintelligent behavior. What you should have done is you should have gone to several of my Gurudev's programs. You should have checked it out, in other words. You should have met him, had a chance to interact with him. That would have been the intelligent thing to do before attacking me as if I'm crazy. How would you know that it's a cult if you've never been there and had any experience for yourself? You know, you've been watching television, you've been watching too many movies, you've been taking the advice of friends who have no idea because they've never been there. And so this is what I told them, and then I walked out. So my father contacted me after I walked out of the intervention, and I said, look, I know how you feel about this, and you know how I feel about this. We can interact, we can share great times, we can spend time together, but my one term is that we do not discuss my guru. Discussion of my guru is off the table because I now know how you feel. We're not going to discuss it. We can discuss anything else. Well, he refused. He said, I'm not abiding by that. And I said, well, fine. Then we're not going to have any interaction. So it was 5 years. 5 years went by. We had no discussion, no interaction. We did not speak to each other at all. And then after 5 years, my stepmother, my second mom, because my father had remarried, called me and said, we're having dinner. It's just going to be a handful of us. Would you like to come? And I said, sure. So when I arrived at dinner, my stepmom says, your father has something to tell you. And he said, I went to your ashram. I stayed there for 2 weeks. I attended some programs. I thought it was very pleasant. I met your guru. And he was in the middle of writing a book. So he said, I spent 2 weeks there, mostly locked in a room, writing, but I did attend some programs, and I think at least it's better than drugs, is what he said. What he said to me, and I'm really happy for you. So after 5 years, because I had drawn that one boundary, and even with that boundary, I never stopped loving my father. I loved him dearly, but the boundary that I established caused him to respect me, and it forced him to actually do what I had told people in the intervention they should have done. So even with boundaries, it is entirely possible to love without conditions because, first and foremost, love is an inner experience. The Siddhas of our lineage say all the love you give is meant for you. When you give love, you experience that love for yourself. It's actually being directed at you when you give and express love. And so even in loving unconditionally, which is first and foremost an inner state, you can experience this supreme love even when you have to draw boundaries. And so this is not such a far off experience. I'll give you another example. I've often asked mothers and fathers of children, have you ever had to really raise the bar? Your kids weren't listening to you. So you had to raise your voice, you had to yell at them, even though you didn't want to. And have you had the experience that inside you were really smiling and you were kind of play acting at yelling at them because it's not really what you wanted to do, but you had to kind of up the intensity? And so they've all said yes, they all know that experience. And so this is just another example of being able to love without conditions while expressing and acting on boundaries. So love is only love if it is experienced first inside by loving yourself unconditionally. This is where it starts. You can't love others unconditionally if you don't love yourself even with all your foibles and mistakes, even with your notions that you might be impure or not able to measure up, even with those notions, you have to start by loving yourself unconditionally. Wherever you're at this moment, at this time in your life, to love yourself unconditionally. That has to happen first. You can't extend supreme love to others unless you have first extended it to yourself. As you extend this unconditional love to yourself, you begin to experience an expansion. Once you begin to love yourself unconditionally, once you are engaged in the ability to laugh at yourself and love yourself even regardless of your foibles, now you have the experience that then allows you to extend unconditional love to others. But it can only be love. What makes love supreme is its unconditionality that is always based on first seeing God in yourself, knowing that you are worthy of self love because you are God, you are the self, and then seeing God in everyone else and everything also.
Is there a difference between love and infatuation?
Yes, and I was kind of talking a little bit about this previously. Uh, that infatuation again has to do with wanting to barter and trade needs for wants. And there are many people, I've seen many people who have told me, and then I've observed their relationships, that they're in the relationship because they want to trade needs for wants, and they believe that that's what relating is all about. And so if you're trading needs for wants and you feel that the trading is equal on the part of all parties to the relationship, that's infatuation. Infatuation also occurs because in this trading of needs for wants, there is the desire to control outcomes. There is the desire to control people, places, and things on some level to fulfill your own limiting desires and cravings. And again, a lot of people think that this is what love is about, but that's not love, that's infatuation. And the infatuation increases if a person feels I'm getting everything I want. All of my limiting desires and cravings are being fulfilled. That's infatuation. It has absolutely nothing to do with love. And I've seen many relationships over time break down because suddenly all parties to the relating do not feel that the bartering and trading is equal any longer, right? The one person feels, well, I'm giving you more than you're giving me on that mundane level. And then the relationship starts to break down, and then aversion starts to set in, infatuation leaves the room, aversion sets in, and then the relationship begins to deteriorate. But that's because it was never based on supreme love. Contrast that to people who you may know, and I certainly know, who are genuine friends. They're true friends. A true friend will extend love to you regardless of what he or she is getting in return. And a true friend will extend love to you regardless of what you're into that the friend may not be interested in. Right? A true friend will say, well, I'm not interested in that, but if it's what you want to do, I happily support you in it. So friendship is a very good start. True friendship is a very good start in being able to interact with supreme love, being able to interact without conditions. And I know many relationships that have prospered over a very long period of time, including marriages, because the people engaged in the relationship insisted to be each other's best friend. And that was the foundation for the relating. And those are the relationships that last and last and last.
Can people be in an intimate relationship and not love each other?
Yes, and I've seen that a lot also. So again, there are all kinds of conditional relationships like this. And often I've seen people agree, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Here are my terms. You tell me what your terms are, and then we'll come to an agreement about the bartering and trading. And then if we agree on the bartering and trading, then we'll relate on that basis. And this is where the phrase, what's love got to do with it, comes from. That famous song sung by Tina Turner, right? When she had this realization that she was in this very abusive relationship with Ike Turner, and she was getting a good number of her limiting desires and cravings fulfilled, including that of being produced, because she didn't believe that there were other people who could produce her better than Ike Turner, because he had convinced her that he was the only one who could make and sustain her career, which of course was false. But she believed that for a while. And so there was bartering and trading that went along with that. So she accepted his abuse. This story has been made into a feature film. She accepted his abuse for many, many years until she reached the point where she actually believed love has nothing to do with relating or with marriage. It's just a matter of bartering and trading. It all comes down to, are you giving me what I want? And are you getting what you want? And so that's infatuation. And people who are infatuated don't necessarily love each other. And I've seen this a lot, as I said, that people can be engaged for sometimes a relatively extended period of time when they're happy with the terms of the bartering and trading. For example, there are a lot of people who are engaged in relationships just because they want good sex. Everything else is secondary to the sex. And often that's discussed before the relationship is entered into. And I've seen this a lot. And so that's the agreement. Has nothing to do with love. As long as the sex is great, we'll stay together. The minute it starts to decline, we're done. I'm just using this as one example. Here's another example, which is quite common. And you and I both know people, I believe, who are stuck in this kind of thing, where they are financially taken care of by someone else. They don't earn their own living, and they enjoy this relationship where they get almost everything they want financially, and they find themselves stuck because there is, of course, a trade-off to being kept financially, which is to endure often various types of abuse. And there are a lot of people who I know who enter into intimate relationships and marriages because of finances, because one or both parties want to agree on interacting based on money and the exchange of money. And so this is another common thing, and that's also infatuation, which again is enshrined in the limitation of the ego, this desire to manipulate and control outcomes, to manipulate people, places, and things on some level. So I used to know women who were in these kinds of relationships, and they would manipulate their significant other or their boyfriend or their husband based on sex. You're not getting until you write me a check for this. You're not getting any more until you buy me the jewelry I want, or until we take the vacation that I've been asking you for 2 years. These things are quite common. They have nothing to do with love. But there are people who make these agreements either openly or subtly by way of surrendering to certain behaviors, and they just go along like that. Eventually, these relationships decline and they become difficult to remain in.
This sounds like a very lofty ideal that is only attainable by saints.
Mm.
How can an ordinary person actually experience and embrace this?
So the self-realized love beings of our lineage all say, in the beginning, love is somewhat tainted, somewhat selfish. But any love is better than no love. And so even if the love is tainted in the beginning, you start there. In other words, you start with whatever capacity you have to love. It may not be that you have a great capacity to love. Your capacity to love may be very small in the beginning, but you start there. And then here in Nityananda Shaktipat Yoga, we teach methods and we also embrace the wisdom understandings of the great sages of our lineage. And in doing so, that helps people, and we've seen this over a period of many years, that people are able to gradually express love with less and less conditions. They're able to gradually express love in ways that are more and more supreme, meaning more and more unconditional. And that happens first by way of people recognizing that God exists in themselves first. That has to be the first recognition. For true self love, you have to recognize that you're a divine being. Even with all of your foibles and perceived mistakes, you have to recognize God within yourself. Now, we teach methods here for doing that. And as you begin to experience that it's true, that God exists within you, as you begin to have that experience, now you're able to, you develop the desire to express love in a more unconditional way to others. And that happens gradually over time. Here's something else that happens. People who are able to express supreme love are better lovers. They are better friends. And so as you begin to expand your ability to love in the way I've just described, you become a better lover, a better friend. You begin to attract to you far greater relationships. And as you journey through that and have those experiences, you then develop a stronger and stronger desire to love others unconditionally because you see God in them. And so it's a gradual process, but we've seen people here completely transformed gradually. You don't have to be a saint. You don't have to be completely pure. You can begin right where you are, and your intention is a very powerful thing. Your intention to expand your experience of love, your intention to love yourself first, more completely, as God, as the self, is a very powerful tool. And then as you nurture that intention, you can gradually, and it may not happen in a week or 10 days or even several months. It may take several years, but you can gradually expand the way you're able to experience and express love unconditionally. And as you observe your own expansion in this regard, you gain a great deal of joy and peace. And as you begin to have more and more experiences of love and joy and peace in this way, you want to then love in a more unconditional fashion. And so it's gradual, but supreme love and the ability to express it becomes automatic as your experience of the self expands. As you heighten your experience of the indescribable joy of the self by calming the restless mind, by making the mind silent, by dissolving the mind when you don't have to be engaged in any tasks, as you experience that joy welling up inside you, it becomes very easy to take the step to love unconditionally, even when you have to draw boundaries. So it's a gradual process, but we've seen it happen here. I've seen it happen over and over and over again with people who are far from being saints. I know it from my own experience in the early stages of my own sadhana when I was anything but a saint. So it's entirely possible. You do have to have leadership in this regard, though. You do have to have leadership. I'm so grateful that I had the incredible leadership of my own Sri Gurudev in this regard. And this is why we have Nityananda Shaktipat Yoga. And this is why we have the leadership that Kedarji extends and the profound leadership of the Siddhas of our lineage, of which there are many. This is why this leadership exists. With leadership, because the Siddhas lead by example, it becomes very easy to take these steps to begin to understand that supreme love indeed is not a lofty idea and that it can be attained by everyone, even you.